Welcome to Covenant Conversations. My name is Kyle Burkholder, and today I'm joined by Carissa Wott. Carissa is a frequent guest here on Covenant Conversations and one of our most popular guests, and you're about to find out why. We invited her on today to talk about rethinking boundaries. Boundaries is a term that came from a 1992 book that kind of took relationships by storm as everybody began enacting healthy boundaries, except somewhere along the way, we've either misunderstood the term or begun to misapply the concept, and a lot of damage has been created in the meantime. So Carissa is here to help us rethink boundaries and reapply them in a healthy way. And what we're going to find is not only will we get better relationships as a result, but I think as you listen to her wisdom, this might actually revolutionize your relationships as you apply these healthy boundaries. So I cannot wait for you to hear all she has to say. Without further ado, let's get into today's conversation. Welcome to today's Covenant Conversation. I am Kyle Burkholder, and I am joined today by Carissa Wott, our frequent guest, Covenant member, clinical psychologist. What am I missing? Wife, mother, daughter, runner. What? Tell us something we don't know. What is one thing about you we don't know? You have a food allergy that nobody knows about. What do you got?
Oh, I have a food allergy that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
So there's that. Beyond that, I love Swedish fish. How about that?
Swedish fish. They're not too chewy. It's not a
Too
thing.
chewy. They're not too sour. They're like the one red candy that I really like.
Okay.
It's weird.
I did
know.
not see Swedish
That's all
fish
I've got.
coming. That's a good way to start. I have some boundaries around Swedish fish. I can't quite get there. Sometimes if they're soft, they'd be good, but they're a little too hard and it's a little jaw pain for me.
They do need to be fresh.
Okay. So we've established some things, and I mentioned that I have some boundaries regarding Swedish fish, and I did that. This is going to shock the audience on purpose. Today, Carissa is here with all of her expertise to talk to us about rethinking boundaries. Boundaries are a thing that you've probably heard about. Maybe you use the term. People all over have been setting good boundaries or thinking they're setting good boundaries. And what she and I were talking about, just to let you behind the scenes, everybody, is that it's possible that this has been misapplied or misunderstood, or even occasionally boundaries have become this weapon that we use in relationships. So Carissa is here today to help us recenter and remember what real boundaries are, what the proper use of this whole idea is. But to get us started, obviously we have to know what are boundaries, what is the beginning, what's the real definition, how are they designed, kind of walk us through what's the right way to think about them in the original sense.
Yes. That's such a great question to start with, because I think over time, the concept of boundaries has gotten really, really skewed. And it is this lovely kind of popular word to throw around, like, that's my boundary, and that's a boundary violation, and you can't cross my boundary. And we use it so often. And I think so often we have people that are using that language, but maybe not fully understanding what a boundary actually is. And then it just gets confusing and messy for all of us. So at its most kind of fundamental, basic level, a boundary is simply a decision that we are making about really where we want to spend our time, where we want to spend our energy. They're decisions about things that we will accept and maybe certain things that we won't accept. Ideally, our boundaries are based on our core values. They're choices that we can make to keep ourselves physically and emotionally safe. But at the end of the day, the boundary is about what we are going to do, how we are going to respond in certain circumstances. So boundaries are not our way of controlling another person's behavior. They're not an ultimatum that we give to another person about how they need to act or how they need to treat us. They are about us and about what we are going to do and the choices we are going to make and the responses we are going to have in given situations.
So, okay, this is helpful. You used the word response a couple times, and that's, I think that's super instructive. So what you're saying is, because we think of boundaries, they are proactive constructs for me. So can you make it an example in my life? Just make any old random thing up, however you want to do it, but make me the example and say, I've set a proactive boundary. It looks like this. And then what you're saying is when somebody tries to violate that boundary or encroaches
Mm-hmm.
upon that, that's
Mm-hmm.
when my response is the activation of it. But I have a sense for it. What does that mean in an example
Yes.
sense that we can kind of get our hands around it?
Yes. So let's use a really general example about work.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I want to have a boundary about my work hours. And let's say I don't want to engage in work activities after 7 p.m. And so maybe some of my work activities could be responding to messages, whether it's emails or whether it's through my client portal or text messages or things like that. So maybe I even tell clients and I tell my staff, hey, I'm setting a boundary around my work. I'm not going to be responding to messages and things after 7 p.m. I'll get to those the next day. Inevitably, somebody's going to send me a message. There will be an email. There will be a request. There will be, right, this encroachment on the boundary that I set. So the task of setting that boundary is for me to choose to not check my email, to not respond, to follow through on the action. It's not that I tell people I don't want to work after 7 and now every single person is going to say, oh, good, Carissa said she's not going to work past 7. I better not send her this message. It's about what am I going to do when that happens? And so it's not necessarily that they're violating my boundary because they sent the email. It's my job to hold that boundary that I set, to turn off my notifications so that I don't see the emails, to wait to respond. I don't have to get pulled into responding simply because somebody sent a message my way. That's a line that I'm going to have to maintain.
Okay. And so in this way, when we do it poorly, our communication of our personal boundary is an intention of controlling other people's behaviors. If I can tell enough people with enough force, not that I don't do X after 7, they won't send me things. Whereas what
Right.
you're saying is the healthy way to approach boundaries really doesn't take pressure, may be the wrong word. It doesn't take the onus off of you to apply and uphold that boundary. And that's maybe, is that a good diagnostic in general? If the boundary is healthy, maybe check one is the onus on me to hold it, or am I putting it out there for others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which in some ways, that's incredibly freeing when we think about a boundary, because I have people talk to me constantly in the office about, well, I can't set this boundary because this person isn't going to respect it. They're not going to follow through with the boundary that I am setting. So I can't even set it. And then we dial it all the way back and we say, well, but is it actually about their behavior or is it truly more about your behavior? And if it's more about you and your behavior, well, now you can be empowered and now you can control that piece of it. And so, no, we can't, even when we set very strict boundaries, we can never control what another person is actually going to do. But we do have the ability to control how we respond. And that then might impact what our interactions are like with that person down the road.
This is good. And is this, so where does blame shifting fit in? So let me use me, my lactose, my intolerance. I'm totally intolerant. And ice cream is in my home, or we live near Sunday Station and somebody wants to go to Sunday Station. I will go pick up 3. There's 4 of us in the house. I'll go pick up 3 orders and nothing for myself because I have a clear boundary for me.
Yes.
Now, if I'm going to go and I say the temptation was too much and I'm getting a 4th and I'm going to eat this ice cream and I'm going to be miserable for the next 18 hours, but I'm doing it. And if you guys just weren't so dead set on having Sunday Station, that blame shifting, is that really common in the boundaries misapplication?
Oh, it's so common. Yeah, we make other people responsible for our boundaries. And that is so destructive for ourselves and also just for relationships as a whole. Because it is our responsibility to hold the boundaries that we set. And sometimes it is a challenge, and sometimes there is pressure on us to lower that boundary. That's a challenging thing, but also we do have the ability to navigate that and to still respond in line with our boundary. if we're willing to experience a little bit of discomfort.
Do you think, I mean, maybe it's a two-part question, but what I struggle with, and you and I have talked, we both sit with people on our couches in various forms that have misunderstood or misapplied boundaries. Where are we getting it wrong? Where are we? Is it as simple as this is purely about you and yours to control versus others? Is there some other way that we're misunderstanding the whole concept? Has culture sort of shifted it a little bit, and now we all think it's something it's not? Where are we missing it?
Yeah. So as you ask that question, I can just run through this list in my mind. So kind of thinking ahead, there's 4 main ways that I can think of. So I'm just cueing you into that number. So if I get myself off track as I respond, we can come back and tackle those other ones that I miss. But I think the primary way that we get off track with boundaries is we are using them to control somebody else's behavior. We find something in another person's behavior that we don't like, and we want to change that. And so we use the boundary in a way that is creating an ultimatum for that other person. If you do this, then fill in the blank. And it might be a really significant threat. If you do this, I will cut you off. If you do this, I won't speak to you again. If you do this, then the relationship is over. And what happens is we start to take this boundary, which is about us and what we will do, we turn it into being about the other person. And then that's where we start to weaponize it. And we start to use our responses as a way to punish the other person for not getting in line with what we want them to do. Right?
It is. So if we can, I mean, this applies clearly to all relationships. This seems it would be especially easy to weaponize within a marriage because of the committed nature and the cohabitation and all this. Is there kind of a common example so we can get, all the individuals that you may know? What's the common example or the maybe safe example we can give to help people understand what that weaponization looks like? And it's almost a really clever passive aggressive way to exert control. So what would that look like for somebody if they're going, is this what we're doing, or is this what he's doing to me or she's doing to me? What does that look like?
Yes. So can I give like a parent-child example first and then transition into a spouse example? Because I think sometimes even taking it more separating it first might let us go deeper. So let's use the example, homework with children. So sometimes, maybe this happens in my house, maybe not. Children get frustrated doing their homework and they take the frustration of the day, which they would never express to teachers, and they sit down to do homework and they want to release that, right? And so as I sit and maybe help a child with their homework, maybe I am experiencing some disrespectful talk coming my way. One of my boundaries is I don't want to accept disrespect or being yelled at or lashed out at when I am trying to help somebody. So if that is my boundary, I'm not going to be yelling at my kid to say, you don't get to speak to me this way. It's, I don't like being disrespected when I am offering help. So I am going to remove myself from the situation for now, right? If you would like help, feel free to speak with me respectfully and I will come on back. So there's a removal, which I am responsible for, but then I'm not weaponizing it by saying, I will never help you again. You are a disrespectful child and you violated my boundary and I'm done. Good luck for the rest of your life on your homework. It's this opportunity to say, I will step out because I am in control of my behavior and what I tolerate. And then I can choose to come back in and repair and mend that relationship when that person is ready.
That is super helpful. I had this conversation yesterday. One of my girls, I make lunches in the morning to some degree. They put some of it together. I put another, I make the sandwich, whatever. And one of my kids has been returning home with an uneaten sandwich. Enough, not every day, but enough that it's exactly. And I had the conversation. And I'm replaying it now going, I think I did this well, but I'm not totally sure. And I said, if you aren't going to eat the sandwich, there's no punishment for that. What I'm going to do is stop exerting all the effort to make the sandwich because that's wasted time and money for me. And I'll let you do whatever it is you're doing for lunch because you're clearly eating something until you tell me you're ready to re-engage with sandwich life. And is that maybe my example of what you're saying? Is that a real example of, as opposed to if you don't eat this sandwich then, and there's like a weird behavioral control aspect as opposed to, but it seems like a really thin line, right?
It can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if I would have said, I'm not making another sandwich ever again, or you either ship up or shape out, whatever, flip the words around, that feels like I'm trying to control. But if it's almost, I feel like it's in the calmness of the response to just go, I'm choosing not to do this anymore because of what you're doing. I see that this is no longer necessary. I'm going to back out, let you have your way. I see you making a choice. That's good. Here's the one I'll make in response, and we'll readdress when needed. Yeah.
Each of you holds agency then, right? Yes. So if we shift that into maybe more of like a husband-wife dynamic, we could use an example here, which maybe kind of, again, toes that line. Let's say one member in the couple is notoriously late, and one member in the couple, it really values time. A lot of times that happens. We get two people who are seemingly a little bit opposite in this way that get pushed together. So let's say the person who values time has an important event coming up and they really want to be there on time. That's really important to them. And so the way that it might be presented is, hey, being on time is really important to me. I want to be to this event on time. I am planning to leave at 6 p.m. If you are ready, I want to go with you. That would be wonderful. If you're ready, let's go together. If you're not ready, that's also okay. I'm going to leave at 6. Feel free to meet me there. Now, some people may be listening to this and they're like, oh, geez, like that is not going to go well. And they're laughing like, yeah, right, Carissa, I can't have that conversation. You can. The truth is sometimes when we are setting boundaries, they might displease the other person. And so we can't walk in expecting that the other person's going to say, oh, okay, honey, you're right. Yes, I am ready to go. I am ready to join in. Sure, I am happy to do this. You might run into a little bit of conflict. That's part of setting boundaries. Sometimes we have to accept some of that conflict in that, no, I'm not trying to control you. I'm not forcing you to do something that you don't want to do, but I do want to still stay in control of my action and hold my own agency in this relationship. And that actually over time strengthens relationships because you're not controlling one another and you're not getting resentful when that other person doesn't live up to the expectation that you're setting, because you still get to go to the event on time because you're in control of that piece.
We have a family that moved away, no longer attends our church, but it was this exact scenario. And she said, I like to be a few minutes early. If we're all ready, we'll go together. And they came separately just about every Sunday. And we're thrilled with it because they understood. Yep. He would say, I don't really like to be rushed and I'm taking my time and I'll get there when I get there and I'm fine. And she would say, I feel rushed if I'm not early. And they had a nice detente where they were like, I'm happy with this. I'm happy with this. Okay. But you have to imagine the first time wasn't necessarily as pleasant because somebody was feeling accused of either being too obsessively early, which the early crowd, the on-time crowd gets called OCD inappropriately. Like, well, you just can't be 5 seconds late. And the other side gets called disrespectful for procrastinating and being 5 seconds late. How does that work out? Is it literally just healthy boundaries create good opportunities for healthy communication? Or is that the danger that comes with this, is when we actually right size this, it's going to force us to be more honest in communication. And for a lot of us, that's a huge challenge and that's super hard.
Yes. I think it will force us to be more honest. But at that time, it takes away some of the threat of the conflict because, sometimes people are afraid of conflict because of their past history with conflict. And somebody may have set the boundary and said that they're okay leaving at 6 p.m., but then they were yelling and screaming at their partner because they were not ready on time. And you've got this history of still being punished for the other person maybe not holding to their own boundary. And so when you have this experience of setting the boundary, applying it appropriately, that person takes the response, yep, I'm going to leave. The other member of the couple shows up at 6:30. Hey, I'm so glad that you were here. I really enjoyed being here on time. It felt good. I wasn't rushed. You look wonderful. I'm glad you had the time to get ready. Now, all of a sudden, it doesn't feel like so much conflict. It's, oh, you're responsible for you. I'm responsible for me. Neither one of us has to resent one another because of our differences and because we each have a different boundary around this particular area. We can just be responsible for ourselves. And that's a pretty workable place to communicate from in a marriage.
That is helpful. And I think that's something actionable for a lot of people to even consider. Like you're saying, that maybe the step before the boundary is considering the other person's wiring or the other person's preferences and affirming those as being fine before we then say, even though those are fine, here's what is my preference and I'll do this other thing. So that's really good and applicable for us. Can we go back to the friendship side? So this is something we've run across, and everybody will run across this at some point when and I think I'm trying to get into when does this get in an unhealthy, I'm building walls that are over indexing on safety and security as opposed to the communication you're talking about? Because it's in a marriage to some degree, and up until a certain point, I suppose, you have to try to work it out because you're stuck. Friendships, I've witnessed a lot of people saying, this person hurt me or this person felt unsafe to me, and I'm building a wall that they can't, it's an impenetrable wall. They'll never get through. I'm never trusting myself with them again. And there is something that in some scenarios is probably great about that. Oftentimes I feel like there's an overreaction or there's no reconciliation. We're not leaving room for communication. Can you talk through that? Because I hear a lot of that. I'm sure you hear that too, when people are hurt and the safest thing to do is build the tallest wall possible. What does that look like in your office? What does that look like in practice? And how do we get out of that sort of unhealthy side?
Absolutely. I love that you brought that question up because that was one of my points that we were going to get to. So it's so ideal and perfect. We cannot approach boundaries in an all or none fashion. Each relationship that we have in our life should probably have different boundaries. We should be responding to each different person a little bit differently based on the type of relationship, the depth of the relationship, the nature of the relationship. So my boundaries with my husband should look very different than boundaries with a friend. My boundaries with my friends should look different from one another. And I think sometimes the trap with boundaries, because it's simple, is to approach everybody the same. So somebody has hurt me in the past. Somebody has violated my trust in the past. So I'm giving nobody trust, right? Or somebody makes a mistake and I perceive a boundary violation. So I cut them off. I'm done, right? I don't want to deal with the nuance. I don't want to risk feeling hurt again. So I throw up this wall and I just start cutting people out of my life. And then we start to see people really with no meaningful relationships because it's too strong. And so when we are identifying what our boundaries are, going into it, we need to expect that people will cross those lines. That is human nature. So if somebody crosses a line that you have set, that's not necessarily a reason that you need to cut them off. If it's an extreme line, if we're talking about physical abuse, if we're talking about like egregious kinds of behavior, yes, that then requires a very, strong response. But if you tell somebody, there are ways that I don't really like being spoken to, and they speak to you in a really maybe sarcastic or condescending way, maybe that's not a reason to end the relationship. But maybe that's requiring that response that says, you know what, that felt really disrespectful to me. It's important for me to let you know that I felt disrespected because that's the response that I make in a relationship when I feel that boundary violation. What you do with that information is your choice. Now, if it happens 20 times, well, then maybe we change the response. But we have to be thoughtful about what is our response and are the responses in line, hopefully, with maintaining relationships, not ending relationships. So there are people in my life where they're wonderful people. I love them dearly. they're not going to get confidential information from me. That is a boundary that I have set because maybe they're a little bit more loose-lipped than some other people. Some people are great at holding information confidential, and some people are not just as strong at that. I'm not going to end a relationship with somebody, but I will choose how much I share with them. And so that's kind of that nuance in setting boundaries, where I don't want to cut somebody off, but I want to use that information to then guide maybe my behaviors and how I approach the relationship.
Super helpful, especially in our own personal diagnostic, because what I can hear the brains kind of firing now, listening and trying to, is this okay? What what she just said applies to me? Because I'm doing it, and I imagine everybody listening is going away. Okay, what have I gotten slightly off track? In line with that, the concept of avoidance comes up, where the more conflict averse potentially could be inclined, because boundaries are a really clever way to avoid conflict by simply removing that entire part of my life. How I almost wish there was a diagnostic, and I don't know how to phrase even the prompt to set you for it, but my guess is there's some people that are profoundly isolated and lonely and don't even realize that perhaps the misapplication of boundaries in their life, or the misunderstanding of it, has led them to a place where they're surrounded by walls, and it's up to them to some degree to pull some of those walls down and re-engage. Is that maybe accurate?
Yes, absolutely. There is risk inherent in any relationship that you are involved in. There just is. And that's something that we have to be willing to accept. Also, any relationship requires work. And so sometimes I have heard this spoken to me before, and I responded kind of in a shocked way. And then I was like, you know what? I wonder how many people think this way. The statement was, I don't really want friends because they're too much work. And for me, as somebody who loves human beings, I was like, I cannot imagine that. And then I was like, actually, there's probably a decent percentage of individuals that say, I don't want to put in that work. It is too risky. The reward isn't worth the effort or the risk. And that's where we have to then start to lean into, like, what is our design? And our design, we are created to be in relationship with people, right? It is literal torture to isolate somebody. Yes, it is work. Yes, you might get hurt. You'll survive the hurt that you feel, because we can. God gave us these emotions. We've got space for them. We've talked about that in another podcast, right? That's part of life that we need to accept and just dig into. We need relationships to be healthy, and it's going to be effortful.
Some of what I was reading heading into this to kind of prepare for this and refreshing some of the concepts was this idea of walls versus gates. And so some of what you're talking about is, if I've created too many walls in my life that are insurmountable places for people to get through, what I don't want to do, if I'm feeling unsafe, I don't want to take those down, because now I feel super insecure. I don't want to get hurt again. And the whole idea, I think, of the walls and gates analogy was, you can build gates in the wall that can let a little bit in at a time.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that, just from the standpoint of somebody who's trying to maybe reform the way that they're handling relationships? What's a safe way to kind of reintegrate into the unsafe world of relationship?
Yes, absolutely. So I love that analogy. And I think it's always important to remember that if you have built a wall, and if you decide to open a window or open a gate in that wall, if it doesn't go well, build your wall again. You're already good at it. We're not trying to ever crumble a wall. You are choosing ways at the beginning that you can tolerate, that feel safe for you, to test out should there be a gate. So opening up that gate might be for somebody as simple as asking somebody to go to coffee. It might be sharing a struggle. It might be trusting somebody to make your family food when you are sick or having, a difficult time in your life. It could be walking up to the front of the church and sitting on one of those red chairs that you have sat at the front, asking somebody to pray for you. You can start small. And If you decide that that doesn't go well, fine, put your wall back up.
Mm.
My belief, though, is that if you start small, you start to experience some of those relational rewards. You start to feel that connection with another person. It starts to really kind of nourish your soul in some ways. And then that actually, what we see is it tends to motivate people to add in more gates, to add in more windows, to maybe lower the wall in general, or in specific circumstances with specific people.
So it sounds like speed and pace of this thing really matters. I'm thinking of even like a dating relationship with somebody who's been hurt in the past or whatever, that our willingness in a world that wants to microwave everything. So if I'm talking dating, the world wants you to get on Tinder, and what you need to do is go to 100 coffees with somebody, on the most extreme example, to just see, is this going to be okay? What about the pace of our relationship and our kind of long suffering and getting back in there? Is there something in that slowness that we could learn to be healthier as we get back into these places?
I mean, I think the slowness in and of itself is beautiful. It sets, if you are going slow, it sets the expectation that nobody is supposed to be perfect, but that you are in control of your responses and what you are kind of giving to that person. If there is potentially a violation, you can tolerate it, you can handle it. It doesn't devastate you, it doesn't break you, it doesn't destroy you. And it allows, going slow, that allows for the natural progression of how trust is supposed to develop anyways. Trust was never supposed to be all or none. And some people jump in to the deep end really quickly in relationships. They're struggling maybe on the opposite end with not having any fences or gates or any type of wall, and they dive in, and that is really risky as well. And so it's going slow allows you to see, what boundaries do you need? Where can you trust this person? Are there boundaries that you have with another person that maybe you don't need to have in place with this person? And, for lack of a better word, that's how things are supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
We speed things up too much, and that actually really is to our detriment.
The deep end is maybe the perfect illustration. I'm afraid of some things. The ocean, I'm a little afraid of the ocean. It's really big, and I'm really small, and there are sharks, and you're just like, okay, of all the things that could go, what is a riptide? I don't want to Google that again. There's some things with the ocean. I don't think I want to be dropped into the deep end lest I drown. And the same feels relationally true, especially for the recovering boundary setter who's trying to get back into it. Wading into the water allows me to take a new vantage point with each step. Is this step safe? Yep. Is this step? And then there's a point when the waves are up to my neck, I might go, I'm going to edge back a little bit and until I'm comfortable here. Yeah. And that feels like the perfect analogy you just kind of unearthed.
Yeah. And there may be a point where maybe you hit neck deep and you're like, I actually don't want to go further than this. That is far enough for me. And that's okay too. Sometimes we think, well, if I open up those gates, if I start leaning into bringing those walls down, then I have to keep going until the other person tells me that it's okay to stop. No, right? Yeah. And that's, I think, also where sometimes people pleasers or people who are trying to recover from being people pleasing, if somebody's not watching the video, I have my hand raised. Boundaries are trickier because when you are more oriented towards people pleasing, the goal is not about how do my responses uphold my values, my morals, what's important to me, what feels safe for me. And it shifts into how do I make that person happy? Which, number one, we can't do anyways. How do I prevent them from being disappointed in me? And all of a sudden we get pulled into deeper water than what we are comfortable with, which sometimes is dangerous. Other times it just breeds resentment, and then it really damages the relationship because you're pulled into a place where you don't feel capable of really sustaining safety in that place. And then you're just resenting that person for pulling you too deeply, when what we really need to do is to say, stop, I'm deep enough. That's far enough. And I don't know if any teenager will listen to this podcast or not, but I think this is something, especially in adolescence and early adulthood, that is so important to learn is that when you put somebody else's happiness or their pleasure over your boundaries, your sense of your own morals and values and what's right, you start to lose your own integrity, because you then are making decisions in the service solely of another person and their emotions in that moment. And you start to lose your sense of self. And it's really hard to develop healthy boundaries if you don't know who you are.
You're almost donating your agency to the other person. So if
Absolutely.
If your chiefly is looking for popularity through their approval, even though I don't want to do X, I will do X if it pleases them. And pretty quickly, what we realize is we're not doing the thing we want to do. We're working on behalf of someone else, living on behalf of someone else.
Absolutely. Which can happen in a marriage as well.
Yeah.
Right? That if my spouse is pleased with me, if I'm doing exactly what they want, then somehow I have value and worth, and that makes me a complete person. And then again, we've got resentment, we've got hurt, we have got potentially leading to really significant boundary crossings that can be actually physically and emotionally harmful, because you've given away your agency.
Yeah, it's another one of those thin lines of selfless service versus pure people pleasing. It's ultimately in us to know where that line is, and it's in us to hold it. And that comes back to the boundaries thing. So if you said you had 4 things, and who knows how far afield we got from your 4 things. I think we touched 2 of them. Did we touch the other 2?
We definitely, we kind of touched on them. I'll run through them quickly. I think the third one is that we expect our spouse, our friend, our parents, our children, whoever, we expect them to hold, protect, or defend our boundaries for us. So we set a boundary that maybe we don't feel comfortable kind of controlling our response, and we expect them to do it for us. So you need to tell your mother or your mom, who would be maybe my mother-in-law, this is what she needs to do because I felt a boundary violation. And kind of with that, we expect that our loved ones are supposed to have the same boundaries as we do. And they don't. And so we have to be ready to, again, take ownership over our responses. If it is a boundary that we are setting, we need to be the one to respond, and we can't kind of farm out the responsibility for the response onto our loved one, whoever that one may be.
Okay. Does that apply in an accountability relationship? So if you have a close girlfriend that you're walking through life with, and whatever you're trying to reform in your life, or whatever the big habit or hang up is that you're dealing with, and you want to, is there a way that even in there, we put too much on them and their willingness to hold us to something, as opposed to, you're free to call me out, but I'm also free to make my choices. And what is that? What does a healthy accountability relationship look like then?
So that's another one of those fine lines where I think accountability is huge with boundaries. And I hope that everybody has somebody in their life that they can talk to and say, look, this is a boundary that maybe I am tempted to cross this line. And I know that it's not good for me, but you know what? I might veer a little bit. Will you be somebody who can hold me accountable? But the task of that person is to orient you to what you said you were going to do. So let's say you go out with friends and you say, hey, you know what? I only want to have 1 drink tonight. I don't want to go further than 1 drink. I'm just going to have 1. Will you hold me to that? Because maybe I've been drinking a little bit too much recently. So you can have a drink and then you can say, hey, I'm going to order another drink. A good accountability partner would look at you and say, you told me you only wanted to have 1. This is your choice. I'm reminding you that you told me that you only wanted to have 1 because this is getting a little bit out of hand for you. That's it. So it wouldn't be, you can't order the drink. I'm tying your hands behind your back. We're leaving this restaurant. I'm dragging you out of this bar, whatever. That's giving them too much responsibility. But it is this idea of having somebody that will orient you back to, this is what you said. This is what is important to you. This is the behavior that you wanted to engage in. Are you going to choose that behavior? Or are you going to choose to go in the other direction? But you're giving kind of one more moment for them to pause and say, ooh, you're right. That is what I said I was going to do. Will I turn back towards it?
Yeah, So that's super helpful. Okay. That's a strange aside, but it clicked immediately when you said that. I went, this feels like something we can kind of get wrong. Or we even blame the friend in your example. We blame the friend that I had 9 drinks, and you're like, where were you to stop me? You're supposed to hold me to 1. And it's like, that can't be it either, right?
Nope. No, because I can't be responsible for you and your behaviors and your choices. Yep.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Well, that's 3. What is the 4th that we didn't get to, or that we maybe glanced off of? Make sure you say it clearly, because I've taken us so far afield. Where are we on number 4?
This has been a great discussion. The 4th one is that we expect people to just know what our boundaries are. They should know. They should be motivated to take care of me and my boundaries. They should want to protect me. People pleasers fall into this trap because people pleasers are actually overly aware of what might be another person's boundary. And so they just kind of assume and take care of other people ahead of time. But if you're not a people pleaser, you're not doing that. And so if we are not explicit about what our boundaries are, then we need to really understand that the people around us don't know. And so sometimes we might perceive a boundary violation, but the other person doesn't know that they did anything wrong because we never set the boundary in the first place. So if you are silently fuming that your spouse is late, 15 minutes late every time you get ready to go, but you never say a word, your spouse doesn't know that it's a problem. So why would they ever dream of responding any differently? So we don't have to explicitly state all of our boundaries to everybody, because some of our boundaries are internal and they're just about us and kind of what we think and what we share. But we should be communicating kind of what those lines are to people around us and telling them how we will respond. So when we do respond that way, it's not coming out of left field for them. They're like, oh, yeah, you did say that. And you did say you would respond in that way. Okay, I get it.
That's great. My personal example is I don't stay out late on Saturday nights. We say no to a lot of Saturday night social events, or we say we'll come, but we're going to leave early. And my wife usually says it for me by saying, as you know, Kyle is very particular because Sunday morning's an early morning and Sunday's a big day, that he needs to be right. And so he's going to want to leave by 9. Are you still okay if we come over as long as we leave by 9? And because she's handling the social event, and yet she'll know in advance. I've made it explicitly clear. Now we as a couple have an explicit, we'll come on Sunday. We're not staying till 11. He may not have a drink. None of the things you're wanting for the social experiments to happen. Do you want to have it on Friday night instead so we can stay a little later or play that game you want to play or whatever? And that's been super helpful to the point that we get invited to fewer things on Saturdays. People who know us go, let's do Friday because I know you don't do Saturdays. And now that helpful, explicit, to your point, the explicit boundary that we're in charge of holding, they've adopted it in relationship going, well, we know this about you. And we also know you're going to hold it.
Yes.
So now we don't even test it.
Exactly. And it was never about controlling their behavior.
Right.
If they want to get together with people on Saturday, great. You're not saying you can only have this event on Friday when I am there. That's that unhealthy version of that boundary. But you're saying, this is mine. Do whatever you choose. If you want me to come, though, this is how you shift it. And I am going to hold the boundary. And then you see this beautiful kind of relational, I don't want to say transaction, but I think that's kind of the best word here. But this beautiful kind of relational transaction that I know how to respond here because I know how you're responding. And I can actually anticipate that because you have followed through with what you said you were going to follow through with. And now I can guide my decisions and kind of what I will do based off of that because I trust how you're going to respond.
Absolutely. The same way that when we host a friend who's had issues with alcohol in the past, the options to drink that night are iced tea and water, because we're not going to introduce it knowing that that's been explicit and that's a problem. And so out of our love, he's not forcing us to uphold his boundaries, but we've learned and loved him well so that we can help and love to make that an easier choice for him to hold his boundary.
Absolutely. Yep. It's done in love. It's not a command. You guys can't have alcohol in your home if I'm coming over. It's, I'm not going to participate, or maybe I don't feel comfortable coming over if there's alcohol presented. Right. And so then you in love decide what you want to do in response to that. There's
great.
Agency on both sides, which is so beautiful. And that's how we get these really good, healthy relationships, because now nobody's trying to control the other person. You're just coming together as human beings wanting to love and support each other well.
You have guided us expertly here. So you've guided us to the end where you now get to either give us your final thoughts and the kind of that summarizing statement that you want to make sure if we remember nothing else, what do you want us to remember? Or if you want a last word on anything else. But you've brought us here. Now take us home. What do you got?
Yeah. Okay. So you've heard me say it 20 times already. Boundaries are about you and what you will do. They're not about controlling another person. So if you walk into considering boundaries with only that in mind, you're gonna be in a pretty good spot. And the second piece is you have to be willing to follow through. Don't set one that you are unwilling to follow through with. That is then a threat or an ultimatum, and that is destructive for the relationship and it's destructive for you. So if something is important enough for you to say, I want to have a boundary about this, then you have to be willing to follow through with the thing that you say that you will do. Those two things. It's about you. Follow through. You're going to probably be in an okay place when it comes to boundaries.
Carissa, as always, thank you for lending us your time and wisdom. Thank you for helping explain some things that have really become muddied in our culture. And I think anybody listening to this has a much clearer understanding of what it really is a great tool that can make for great relationship. And so our prayer, I guess, together will be that as we rethink boundaries with our community, that people are putting this into place in a much healthier way, and maybe through it, getting better communication, better relationships, and overall, better lives. And so thank you for your time. Thanks for being a part of this and for joining us, for being our favorite guest and our most popular guest, Carissa. We will see you again soon. I'm sure you'll be back for another episode. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to our very next Covenant conversation.